Andrew Tate tweets, new TV show. We get modern Western patriots to sit and watch Hitler's translated speeches and try to find a single thing they disagree with. So I thought to myself, you know what? Why not? Let's do that. I got an AI transcribed Hitler speech that I want to sit through and listen to. Just for the record, though, Andrew Tate is not saying that the right is as bad as Hitler. He's saying Hitler isn't that bad. So keep that in mind as we go through. All right, let's give this speech a listen. This is on January 30th, 1939. I believe this is just before he invaded Poland. Yeah, so he invaded September 1st, 1939, and that's kind of the moment that the Second World War was officially kicked off, if you will. That's kind of how they view it. So this is about 8 months before that. The justification that was given for invading Poland in the first place was that Germans were being persecuted by the Polish. It wasn't true at all. But Himmler specifically was creating the circumstances to justify it by like finding a couple of cases of a person like getting a broken arm because they were pushed down or something, and just blowing it up out of proportion and claiming that this is like one example of like 10,000, like Germans are being so mistreated all over the place when it was really not, like they weren't. So anyway, that was their justification to go into Poland to save Germans from persecution. And Hitler, at this point, he had started the whole gas chamber thing. He had started the death camps, and the concentration camps already existed by now. So listen to what he has to say here.
In connection with the Jewish question, I have this to say. It is a shameful spectacle to see how the whole democratic world is oozing sympathy for the poor, tormented Jewish people, but remains hard-hearted and obdurate when it comes to helping them, which is surely, in view of its attitude, an obvious duty. The arguments that are brought up as an excuse for not helping them actually speak for us Germans and Italians.
So he was basically pushing Jews out of the country. There was a moment in time when he stopped pushing them out, and he locked the doors and started sending them to concentration camps and death camps rather than trying to get them out of Germany. I'm not sure when he actually locked the doors. Let me find. When did Hitler stop allowing Jews out of Germany? 1937 to 1938, I believe, is roughly when things started, like when he locked the doors. I don't remember what the year was exactly, but it was around this time. Anyway, a lot of people don't like immigration. And that's what this whole thing was about fundamentally. It was an immigration problem. The Jewish question could be better stated as the immigrant problem. The Jewish question, the immigrant problem. It's the exact same thing that's happening today. Literally identical. All of the neighboring countries, they didn't want refugees to put a strain on their economies, so they kept rejecting the Jews.
For this is what they say. 1, we, that is the democracies, are not in a position to take in the Jews. Yet in these empires there are not 10 people to the square kilometer, while Germany, with her 135 inhabitants to the square kilometer, is supposed to have room for them. 2, they assure us we cannot take them unless Germany is prepared to allow them a certain amount of capital to bring with them as immigrants.
So Germany wanted immigrants out of Germany. They just wanted to deport the immigrants. That's what it was about. And the neighboring countries were complaining about the fact that Hitler was mistreating them and trying to push them out of the country. And when they tried to leave, Germany confiscated a lot of the assets that they tried to leave with. So the Zionists of the time made a deal with Hitler. 1933, August 10th, I think, 1933, they made a deal with Hitler, which allowed Jews to escape Germany with most of their assets if they were going to Palestine. But they confiscated it pretty much in every other scenario. So these countries are saying, let them come with their money. Don't take their money. That was the complaint.
For hundreds of years, Germany was good enough to receive these elements, although they possessed nothing except infectious political and physical diseases.
Does this sound familiar? Poisoning the blood of the country, literal quote from Donald Trump. I'm sorry, man. I'm gonna have to pull this one up. I'm telling you guys, this is identical what's happening in the United States right now. Identical to what happened in Germany from 1933 to 1935. Like, I can put it down to a day. Like March 10th, 1933 is perfectly analogous to February 19th, 2025, roughly. You know, the Enabling Act passed by Hitler. Trump says that he and the Attorney General are the only ones that can interpret the law. He starts pushing out executive orders like mad. Hitler says Jews are, what was it?
Except infectious political and physical diseases.
They're spreading political and physical diseases.
No control whatsoever. Nobody has any idea where these people are coming from. And we know
Talking about immigrants. Yes, we do, but okay.
We know they come from prisons. We know they come from mental institutions, insane asylums. We know they're terrorists. Nobody has ever seen anything like we're witnessing right now. It is a very sad thing for our country. It's poisoning the blood of our country.
Literal words from Hitler's lips. He's quoting Hitler when he says that. I'm telling you guys that it's identical what's happening right now. And remember why we're doing this. Andrew Tate aptly recognizes that Republicans in the United States are spitting images, or the party is a spitting image of the Nazi party. You know, I'm going to talk about this in a little while, but let me just show you guys something. In 50 years, if we're lucky, we're going to look back at this time as the horror show that it really was. If we're lucky, we'll look back at this time the way that we look back at Germany today, like from 80 years ago or whatever. And the faces that we see in Germany in the 1930s are faces like this. There was a cameraman that was taking pictures for the Germans or whatever. And there was a moment when Joseph Goebbels was having his picture taken and found out that the cameraman was Jewish. This is the picture of the moment Goebbels found out the dude was Jewish. That is a dark look on his face. An evil human being. A soulless, empty monster. We can look at that today and recognize that fact about him. In 50 years, if we're lucky, we will look at this picture right here and recognize the same thing about him. This is Tom Homan, the head of ICE, the Deportation organization or whatever. Listen to what he said at CPAC.
I'm not going to be satisfied until every criminal alien gang member, every criminal alien, every Trenda is eradicated from this country and send their ass to Gitmo where they belong.
Talking about immigrants, he wants to, quote unquote, eradicate immigrants from this country. He wants to eradicate immigrants. If we're lucky, we will see him the same way we see this picture. The guy enjoys hurting others.
Damn, I love my job.
He's tearing families apart. He's destroying people's lives needlessly. They're not just criminals. He's not just arresting criminals. He's not just arresting undocumented immigrants. He's arresting people who are here legally, requesting asylum status, or having been brought here as a child means you are legally documented in the United States. And he's taking even those people out. Everybody that has any kind of anything at all, any connection to immigration in any way, shape, or form, he's taking them out and sending them to a literal concentration camp, Guantanamo Bay. I'm going to talk about that at more length in a little while, but I hope that we can all recognize what's happening here and recognize Tom Homan as the truly, deeply evil human being that he is.
What they possess today, they have by a very large extent gained at the cost of the less astute German nation by the most reprehensible manipulations.
So Germany was taking Jews' stuff. They weren't allowing them to leave the country with their assets. Like they sell their house, they get, I don't know, $100,000 for their house or whatever in today's money, and they try to leave. And when they sell it, Germany just withdraws it right from their bank account, and now they have literally nothing. And Hitler claims that the Jews gained that money by manipulating Germans. No, they just worked like everybody else. There was literally no difference between the Jews and every other German. In fact, the Jews in Germany disproportionately fought for Germany in World War I. More Jews were on the front lines because they believed in the cause than there were Germans in World War I. So what Hitler is doing here is he's repeating the stab in the back myth. It was a conspiracy theory of the time that Hitler ascribed to, that basically purported that, or basically said, Germany lost World War I because the Jews were behind the lines messing with stuff and pulling levers and making deals to make Germany fail because they wanted to make Germany fail. It was complete delusion, of course. There's absolutely no reason to believe any of it. In fact, there's evidence against any of that. But that's what makes it a conspiracy theory, right? So Hitler is repeating a conspiracy theory here.
Astute German nation by the most reprehensible manipulations. Today, we are merely paying this people what it deserves. When the German nation was, thanks to the inflation instigated and carried through by Jews, deprived of the entire savings which it had accumulated in years of honest work.
So he's saying that the economic hardship that the Germans dealt with, the inflation and everything else, that was the fault of the Jews. They orchestrated it intentionally so they could get rich off of that. This is populism, blaming some group of powerful people, claiming that it's a deep state that's working against everyone's interests and everything else. Now, in some cases, there really is a group of people working against the working class to benefit themselves, to further their own interests. Like right now, billionaires are doing that. But he claimed that Jews had a secret network that they worked together to nefariously hurt Germans because they wanted to. And he believed that genetically, Jews were inferior. It was like if you took a Jewish baby 2 days old and give it to a German family or an American or whatever, and the American family raises this Jewish baby, the person will grow up to be an evil monster because genetically they're just bad. Anyway, that's kind of, the conspiracy. It's all full of conspiracies.
When the rest of the world took away the German nation's foreign investments, when we were divested of the whole of our colonial possessions, these philanthropic considerations evidently carried little noticeable weight with democratic statesmen.
So basically, when Germans suffered, these democracies, the United States, Britain, France, they didn't give a shit when the Germans suffered. They only cared when the Jews suffered because they're controlled by Jews. That's the claim here. And just try to reframe it in your mind. Like, yeah, we're talking about Jews right now, but reframe it to be about like immigrants or the left. The left is doing all of this damage to society. It's identical to what is being said right now in the United States. Identical in every way.
Today, I can only assure these gentlemen that thanks to the brutal education with which the democracies favored us for 15 years, we are completely hardened to all attacks of sentiment.
They hurt us so badly over the past 15 years that we don't care about any of this anymore, and we're just going to do what it takes to improve our own lives, I think is what he's saying.
After more than 800,000 children of the nation had died of hunger and undernourishment at the close of the war, we witnessed almost 1 million head of milking cows being driven away from us in accordance with the cruel paragraphs of a dictate which the humane democratic apostles of the world forced upon us as a peace treaty.
Talking about the Treaty of Versailles. Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles really damaged Germany and their economy, but it was paying the world back, the reparations for the damage Germany did to the rest of, France and wherever else. And, the other countries, they kind of like France, they were heads about it too. After World War One, they didn't just tell Germany, you can't do these things, you have to do this, you have to pay us this money. No, they were real heads about it. Like the Rhineland is an area in Germany. It's kind of like a demilitarized zone, a DMZ, like a rural area, and Germany defaulted on one of their payments under the Treaty of Versailles. They had to pay the reparations. They defaulted on it, and France marched troops straight through the Rhineland and like reclaimed it because they wanted to be heads instead of helping Germany find a solution, renegotiating or whatever. They were just like assholes about it. And that pissed off Germans even more. Somebody said to me a while back, World War One and World War II were really the same war. There was just a little break in between. And I found that kind of interesting. I mean, there's a lot more nuance to it, obviously, but it's an interesting thought.
We witnessed over 1 million German prisoners of war being retained in confinement for no reason at all for a whole year after the war was ended.
Well, I mean, maybe it's because you invaded their country and tried to, take a whole bunch of land that wasn't yours. I think maybe that could have been the reason why. And maybe they were holding them as negotiating pieces, make sure your dumb didn't try to invade again. I mean, I don't even know if it's true. I'm just proposing possibilities here.
We witnessed over 1.5 million Germans being torn away from all that they possessed in the territories lying on our frontiers.
Literally justifying tearing people away from their lives and their assets. He's advocating for that while complaining that Germans had it torn away.
And being whipped out with practically only what they wore on their backs. We had to endure having millions of our fellow countrymen torn from us without their consent and without their being afforded the slightest possibility of existence.
I mean, think about what he's doing here, what he has done up to now with the Jews. He's complaining about this, not even acknowledging that he's doing the identical thing to another group of people. Like, are you shitting me right now? Like, he's such a whiny bitch. I'm sorry. Really. And he's so, like, not only is he a whiny bitch, but he's just dumb as dog. Like, are you really so stupid that you don't see the parallels here?
I could supplement these examples with dozens of the most cruel kind. For this reason, we ask to be spared all sentimental talk. The German nation does not wish its interests to be determined and controlled by any foreign nation. France to the French, England to the English, America to the Americans.
He's complaining about the Treaty of Versailles right now. After World War I ended, it ended with them basically, with Germany sending basically a group of negotiators to the front lines to negotiate a peace treaty. And it, every minute that passed, people were dying. So they were rushing around. Who was it? Was it Woodrow Wilson Woodrow Wilson is, as the president, was the only one allowed to write treaties, but they had to be ratified by Congress or something like that. I don't even remember now. So he gets the Treaty of Versailles, runs to the Capitol building, calls an emergency session so that everybody, all the senators and everybody can get together and they can all ratify this treaty. And it had to be done instantaneously because people were dying by the second. So Germany rushes people to the front lines to meet with a delegation to write up this treaty, this agreement, the Treaty of Versailles. And the basics were Germany has to pay reparations for the damage that they did to England and France. And they also can't have a military larger than 100,000 foot soldiers, basically 100,000 men. And immediately after World War I, Germany collapsed, their monarchy collapsed into a democracy. It turned into the Weimar Republic, which is a brand new democracy, had a constitution, operated very similarly to the United States, actually. They had a Congress and they had senators or the equivalent. They had a president and everything, just like it. So he's complaining about basically the Treaty of Versailles and the existing government. They had democracy imposed upon them, the German people did, not through the Treaty of Versailles, but when the treaty was signed, democracy was imposed through the Weimar Republic.
America to the Americans and Germany to the Germans. We are resolved to prevent the settlement in our country of a strange people which was capable of snatching for itself all the leading positions in the land.
He's saying Germans belong in Germany. America first, Germany first, that kind of deal. We don't want to take in all of these odd people that don't belong here and are stealing our jobs. They're stealing our jobs. Do you notice what he said there? Capable of snatching for itself.
Capable of snatching for itself all the leading positions in the land.
They're stealing our jobs. These immigrants are taking our jobs. Identical to America today, I'm telling you.
And to oust it, for it is our will to educate our own nation for these leading positions. We have hundreds of thousands of very intelligent children of peasants and of the working classes. We shall have them educated. In fact, we have already begun, and we wish that one day they, and not the representatives of an alien race, may hold the leading positions in the state together with our educated classes.
So it was difficult to tell who was Jewish and who wasn't because they look like everybody else. It's not a race. In fact, race isn't real. It's a fabrication. I mean, there's ethnicity, I suppose. You know, you can go on 23andMe and look up where, you know, you have 2% African DNA and 15% like Welsh DNA or whatever. But race as a concept is fictitious. It's not real. There is no Jewish race. There are people who kind of follow a Jewish faith, and there are people from families that follow Jewish faith and have like a culture that they have kind of carried through the generations or whatever. But Hitler wanted to turn it into like a full-blown race, like black and white. And what freaked him out so much was the fact that there really is no difference between like Jewish and German. Like you can't tell the difference because they're white. They're both white. And he said that they were at the highest levels of society. They had infiltrated the church, the Christian church. They had converted to Christianity so that they could like meddle with it and everything. And he threw a big fit over the fact that like there were Jewish converts to Christianity that were like organists, you know, church musicians or whatever. 18,000 Protestant churches in Germany, just as many pastors, give or take, in that region, and somewhere in that range for musicians, right? Every church has a musician. Do you want to guess how many church musicians were Jewish converts? These people that were meddling with Christianity and trying to, you know, trick people and deceive them. Out of 18,000 churches, two church musicians were Jewish converts, full Jewish converts. So everything that he's saying is delusion, all of it, all the way down. But remember why we're listening. This is identical to what's happening today. Immigrants taking our jobs, poisoning the blood of our country. We need to think about America first. We want to make America great again. Hitler literally used the slogan, "Make Germany great again."
Above all, German culture, as its name alone shows, is German and not Jewish, and therefore its management and care will be entrusted to members of our own nation. If the rest of the world cries out with a hypocritical mien against this barbaric expulsion from Germany of such an irreplaceable and culturally eminently valuable element, we can only be astonished at the conclusions they draw from this situation.
So if they're so worried about Jews being expelled from Germany, why don't they, like these apostles of culture, as he says in a minute, why don't they want them in their country? And the answer is, it boils down to human rights. Like you're mistreating these people terribly. And it wasn't just Jews. I feel like we should reframe this, because framing it up as only Jews kind of puts people in a World War II mindset when it was about immigrants. And the Jews were the immigrants from the region and the era.
How thankful they must be that we are releasing these precious apostles of culture and placing them at the disposal of the rest of the world.
Like people just didn't want people to be mistreated like that is all.
In accordance with their own declarations, they cannot find a single reason to excuse themselves for refusing to receive this most valuable race in their own countries. Nor can I see a reason why the members of this race should be imposed upon the German nation, while in the states, which are so enthusiastic about these splendid people, their settlement should suddenly be refused with every imaginable excuse.
Yeah, because I think at this point, the US was refusing Jewish refugees. They were on a ship on their way to the United States, and the US turned them around, said no. They had to go back and land in Europe again. And I believe that they all ended up in a concentration camp and died, all of those people. The world didn't, I mean, there were a lot of people that cared about what was happening to the Jews, but world governments, and honestly, probably most people in the world, didn't give a. The reason anybody got involved in World War II in the first place was because Hitler stepped outside Germany, tried to take Poland, tried to take Czechoslovakia, and all these other places. Eventually, France and everything else. That's why everybody else got involved. If Hitler had stayed in Germany, closed the doors, and taken out every Jewish person in the country, nobody would have cared.
Excuse. I think that the sooner this problem is solved, the better, for Europe cannot settle down until the Jewish question is cleared up. It may very well be possible that sooner or later an agreement on this problem may be reached in Europe, even between those nations which otherwise do not so easily come together. The world has sufficient space for settlements, but we must once and for all get rid of the opinion that the Jewish race was only created by God for the purpose of being in a certain percentage a parasite living on the body.
Like, nobody believed that. Yeah, sure. There's a subset of like the Jewish community that are what one would call Zionists that are completely out of their heads, drunk on extremism. They're like, it's a far right, ultra nationalist ideology that is basically the same as Nazism in that Nazis believed that like the white race were superior. They were Aryans. They were powerful and smart and strong and everything else. In the same way, there's an ultra nationalist wing of Zionists who are completely drunk on the same ideology except for Jews. They believe that Jews are super powerful and smart and good and all of that other stuff. But that makes up a total of like, I mean, what was the population at the time? Almost nobody. It wasn't the Jews that believed that. He was looking for an excuse to demonize this group of people, like saying trans people are trying to take advantage of your children. It's a general statement implying that all trans people are trying to do this to children. And, have they even come up with one example? I mean, I imagine people can come up with one example of anything, but do we even have one example of trans people taking advantage of a kid? I don't know. I've never heard of one. Maybe. The exception does not make the rule, is the problem.
And the productive work of other nations. The Jewish race will have to adapt itself to sound constructive activity as other nations do, or sooner or later it will succumb to a crisis of an inconceivable magnitude.
They're leeches on society, he says.
One thing I should like to say on this day, which may be memorable for others as well as for us Germans, in the course of my life, I have very often been a prophet and have usually been ridiculed for it. During the time of my struggle for power, it was in the first instance the Jewish race which only received my prophecies with laughter when I said that I would one day take over the leadership of the state.
So what he's doing here, calling himself a prophet? I wrote a book about it. Was Hitler an atheist? Amazon and Audible, owenmorgan.com. But there were a few times where he specifically shouted out Christianity, said we are a Christian people, we live by Christian ideals and all that other stuff. But for the most part, he left Christianity out of the conversation by and large, but he used religious overtones in his speeches. He said religious things like, I was a prophet, or these supposed apostles of culture. Or, when describing his life when he was younger, he would basically frame it up like Jesus' life, where he was redeemed, he was, baptized like Jesus, then terribly mistreated and lost everything, and then he was brought back, breath breathed back into him, kind of frame it up like that. That was his rhetorical style, and that's why people were so obsessed with him. That's why Christians were so obsessed with him. Was Hitler a Christian? To answer directly, yes. I believe that he was a Christian, but before anything else, he liked to manipulate Christians, and he liked to troll people.
And with it, that of the whole nation, and that I would then, among many other things, settle the Jewish problem. Their laughter was uproarious, but I think that for some time now, they have been laughing on the other side of their face. Today, I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war.
There was a family called the Rothschilds at the time, and that's where Hitler is getting this. This is another conspiracy theory. The Rothschild family started with a guy named Meyer Rothschild, I think was his name, and he got a lot of his money by acting as a currency exchange and by loaning money. At the time, in the region in Europe, it was against the law for Christians to gain interest or charge interest of other Christians. So banks would hire Jews who would then charge interest and bring it in on behalf of the bank so that no Christians were breaking any rules. They were having the Jews break the rules for them. Meyer Rothschild was involved in that system and had a lot of gold, and he went around and bought currencies from other, countries. Nathan Rothschild, I think, was his son or something, who's like the next one on the throne. Anyway, the Rothschilds basically made their money by working with European countries who were at war to act as the currency exchange. Like, these countries needed to hire mercenaries to fight on their behalf, but the mercenaries would only accept payment in their currency. So the countries would come to the Rothschild family and they'd say, can you, give us this much money in exchange for that much money? And he would do it. And that made him a ton of money. That made the whole family a ton of money. They became traditional, classic billionaires, which is to say, scumbags. Billionaires are scumbags by their very nature. But they didn't meddle in the political system after the Napoleonic Wars. They helped by paying mercenaries and loaning money to countries and things like that in the Napoleonic Wars, but they didn't do it after that. It was in like the early 1800s, basically. And Hitler claimed that the Rothschild family was meddling in the system, trying to destroy Germany for whatever stupid reason he cooked up. That's the whole thing.
Then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth.
Bolshevization by the Bolshevik Party is the Communist Party in Russia. That's what he means. He hated communists.
Then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. The nations are no longer willing to die on the battlefield, so that this unstable international race may profiteer from a war or satisfy its Old Testament vengeance.
Again, this is a shout out to the Rothschild family. They eventually got to a point where they were very rich. And people said that they funded both sides of every war in history. That's not true. The Rothschilds had banks in England and Germany and France and stuff. And the banks worked with the countries. Like, countries would store their money in banks. It's like having a Chase Bank in Virginia and California and New York City or whatever, and claiming Chase Bank funds all wars between, or all the National Guards or whatever between the states. No, they're just banks in the area. Like, really? Anyway, that's what he's referring to here. The Rothschilds' fear-mongering nonsense came to a fever pitch when they started claiming that they were drinking babies' blood to gain special supernatural favor with God or whatever. Like, they're making a deal with demons and sacrificing babies to them and stuff. That's where all that came from.
Or satisfy its Old Testament vengeance.
Oh, was that the end? Oh yeah, that was the end. Anyway, the point is, that was the end of the Hitler clip. The point is, as Andrew Tate said, was there anything in there that Republicans would disagree with? I mean, replace Jew with immigrant, because Jews were the immigrants, or were viewed as the immigrants at the time. Was there anything that they disagree with? I didn't hear a thing. And to put icing on this cake, if you will, this cake, this is Ken Peters. He's a friend of Greg Locke's. He's one of Greg Locke's pastors. What do you call it? Like one of his, Locke runs a number of different churches, and Peters runs one of those churches on Locke's behalf. This is what he had to say on the subject.
And then we have a pagan president who made it his aim not to pick a qualified Supreme Court justice like a Clarence Thomas. Oh, pray for him. He's not feeling good right now. He cannot die when Biden is in the White House. He cannot die. That is a good man.
So yeah, he was having a rough go of it at that moment. But Biden had just picked Ketanji Brown Jackson as the Supreme Court justice. And this is part of the anti-woke, anti-DEI, anti-CRT nonsense that Republicans were spreading around at the time. They're still spreading it around, but they were at the time too. And he says, Clarence Thomas is qualified by virtue of the fact that he agrees with him. Doesn't matter what your skin color if you agree with him. But if you're black and you don't agree with him, you're bad. That's it, period. If you're white and you don't agree with him, there might be a little bit of nuance in there. Maybe you can find some things to agree on here or there. That's the way that he views this whole system. It is fundamentally racist. And if you don't believe me, just listen a little further here.
And he's black, by the way, and we like him.
Jesus.
We like him a lot. See, we don't give a rip about color.
Totally.
We care about character and morals and godliness and holiness. We don't care if you're red, yellow, black, or white. All are precious in his sight. We have a brand new, did you know this? We have a Patriot church in the Philippines. Now, a Patriot church in the Philippines, that kind of messes up our whole white supremacist, American nationalist.
No, it doesn't. You're white supremacists and you're American nationalists. Why do you think this messes it up?
Whole thing. But you know what? The Filipinos should be patriotic about their country. And they should be fighting for their country too. It's not just about America. Whatever country God has put you in, whether you're in the Philippines or South America, Peru, or the United States of America, you got to fight for that country. God is not a globalist in the senses of how he built the world. As far as globalism is
God's not a globalist? Oh my God.
today, the Antichrist is a globalist. Jesus made nations. The Bible says that there will be people from every nation gathered around the throne.
Yeah, and what do you think that means, every nation? That means everybody around the world will be there and nation will be irrelevant when you get there.
Guess what? You're still going to be American up in heaven. You're going to be in the USA section praising Jesus right next to Mexico and Canada. Woo!
He says there are going to be borders in heaven, and Mexicans aren't going to be allowed into the American section of heaven. That's what I'm talking about. This type of deal. What is there that Hitler said that these people disagree with? Is there anything? I think Andrew Tate was correct in saying that they agree with Hitler, like all the way. Anyway, tell me what you think about it in the comments.